the Gemara went through all these different opinions about what you learn from the word arava, arve, the plural, and we also learned about the tzaftzfa. We learned about the pasuk where it talks about, where it mentions in pasuk in Yechezkel, it mentions the word tzaftzfa there, and the understanding is that there's it's an inferior either type of arava, which is not kosher for aravas, or it's not part of the arava family according to some opinions. But either way, it's not kosher. Our Mishnah said it's not kosher. Interestingly enough, there is a type of arava that's not exactly like an arava, and it has one of the signs of a tzaftzfa, and yet it is going to be kosher. And what is that? That's called the chilfa. What was the term in the Gemara? Chilfa gila. Chilfa gila. That is somehow a kosher arava, even though it's not exactly the look of a kosher arava. It has edges that are like a sickle. In other words, the edges are facing a certain direction, not like a saw where the edges just go downward, and the sharp side, the edges are just straight down, or like two sides it's like a triangle. Each sharp point comes to a point that's pretty much vertical, straight vertically, and the sickle is like the edges are directed towards the handle. There's a certain direction that they're in. They face backwards, and which means you could only cut from one way. You can't just go back and forth and use it as a saw. And that's the way the edges of this chilfa gila is. And somehow it's still going to be, it's similar to a mago, to a sickle. It has the edges like that. Nevertheless, it's kosher. But normally that wouldn't be kosher. And our Gemara gave these simanim, signs. What's a kosher arava and what's not. Interestingly enough, the Gemara gave both, telling us what is a kosher arava. It gave the 3 signs, and it also gave 3 signs of the non-kosher arava, which sort of leaves us a little in a wonder what would be if something has some of the signs. In other words, our Gemara says that, we learned this yesterday, Ezu, it was a Tano Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in Brisa, Ezehu Arava ve'ezehu tzaftzfa. So again, the Arava is is kosher for Aravas, and the tzaftzfa is not kosher. And the Gemara says, in the Brisa says, which one, what is it? What is Arava, what is tzaftzfa? Arava, its stem is red, its leaves are long and narrow, and its edges are smooth. That's the Arava. The tzaftzfa, its stem is white, its leaves are round, and its edges are like a sickle. So they're serrated, and serrated in a certain direction. Now, what do you learn from such a brisa? Well, if you have a kosher arava, then great. That sounds good. What happens if you have an arava that only has 2 of the kosher signs, or 1 of the kosher signs? Or you could ask the question the opposite way. What happens if you have an arava that only has 2 of the non-kosher signs? Or what happens if you have an arava that only has 1 of the non-kosher signs? So in other words, if the brisa only would have said one way, so I would know what to do, because it would say a kosher arava has 3 kosher signs. I would know that if it's missing any one of those, you need all three to be kosher. If it says a non-kosher arava has three non-kosher signs, I would know that you need all three to make it non-kosher and anything with part. But it sort of leaves it vague. It says both. So Tues asked this question. He says, he asked it a little different way, but it's getting to the same point. He says on the Tues Konesh law, he says it's mentioning the signs of a kosher arava. Isn't that enough? What do you need to tell me? The signs of anything that's not kosher is going to be non-kosher. So why are you telling me the signs of a tzaptzipah? Just tell me what a kosher arava is. No, it needs to have those signs. Well, what's a kosher animal? It has to have split hooves and chewits cut. Okay, I know what a kosher animal. I don't need to know now what's not kosher. What are the signs of a non-kosher? The signs of a kosher animal tell me what's kosher. I know the signs of a kosher arava.
Rabbi, that's exactly what the Chumash does. It tells you the signs of the kosher animal, then it comes back and tells you the signs of a non-kosher animal. If it only has one and not the other, it gives you an example from a chazer and from a rabbit and from the rock badger and a hyrax. That's exactly what the Chumash does. It shows you tells you the signs of the non-kosher animal also.
And what are the signs of an animal that doesn't what? What are the signs of other animals that are non-kosher besides those four?
Then they're not included altogether.
Doesn't say. Why doesn't it say? It's obvious.
Right.
You need to have both signs. If you're missing any of the signs, you know that it's not kosher. So the question on the Gemara is, the question Taisus asks, just you told me the signs of the arava, the kosher signs. So that's it. He says, since it explains the signs of arava, so it should be enough. We know what the signs. We know what we need it to be. What do we need to know the signs of a non-kosher, of a non-kosher arava? And in a certain sense, the signs of a non-kosher arava sort of knock us off track because it makes it sound like if it doesn't have all three signs, maybe it's good enough. In a certain sense, it sort of makes the halacha questionable. Now, Taisus answers, he says, you know why it mentions those? Because it's telling us that there are cases that are going to be kosher. There is a case where it's going to be kosher even without all three signs. What is that case? The chilfa gila. Chilfa gila doesn't have all the signs of a kosher arava, and yet it's still going to be kosher. So in other words, why did the Brisa say what a tzaftzifah is? Because it allows us to realize that there is a type of arava that doesn't have all three signs that make it non-kosher, and that arava is going to be kosher. Not that all cases will be that way, but there is going to be a case that doesn't fall into the category of the non-kosher, so it basically allows us to let those chilfa gila to be included in the kosher aravas. It gives us that hint in the brisa that there is going to be a case that doesn't have all three of the signs. It's going to be actually a kosher arava. Not all cases, just that one specific case. That's a case where it's considered a kosher arava. So it's revealing that to us by adding that. You could maybe ask, then why doesn't it just say the non-kosher? What makes it non-kosher? And then you'll know chilfa gila is going to be kosher because you'll have a list of these three things make it non-kosher. In the chilfa gila, it has a long and narrow. It has a red stem, but its edges are serrated. So that doesn't have all the signs of a non-kosher. So maybe all the brisa should have said is the non-kosher, the tzaftzipah signs. And since chilfa gila doesn't fall into the category of all of the non-kosher signs, maybe that should mean then it would be that it's kosher, and maybe that's enough. Why do we need to know? Why does the brisa? You could ask on Tues, why does the brisa have to say the kosher signs? Say the opposite. Just do the non-kosher signs. But I think the answer to that is that not all cases where you don't have all three of the non-kosher signs are non-kosher. They're gonna all, when you don't have all three of the signs that are, if you don't have all three of the non-kosher signs, that doesn't automatically mean that it's kosher. On the contrary, even without having all those signs, it's still non-kosher. But there is one case. Let me mute everyone. But there is one case that doesn't have all the non-kosher signs that actually is kosher. But not that if you find a case that doesn't have all the non-kosher signs, if you find such a thing, that doesn't automatically mean doesn't have all the non-kosher signs, doesn't automatically mean it's kosher. No, probably not kosher. Just happens not to have all the signs, But never anyway. In any event, the brisa says both of these cases, and obviously that's the arava should have those three signs. It happens to be chilfa gila. The Gemara says has serrated edges, but it's actually a kosher arava. There's a famous question asked when it comes to signs of kosher animals or kosher fish. Does the sign, is that just a symbol for you to know that it's kosher, or is the sign what makes it a kosher animal? In other words, the fact that it chews its cud and has split hooves, is that what makes it kosher, or is that what is just a symbol? No, there could be something else that's kosher, but this is a symbol that the Torah knows. Is it intrinsically needed for it to chew its cud and to have split hooves for it to be kosher, or is it just a sign that you want to know which one's a kosher if it happens to have the split hooves? That it happens to be kosher, but not that makes it kosher. It's like the OU on food. That doesn't make the food kosher. It's a sign that you want to know if it's kosher. It has an OU. You know that there's a rabbi that checked it. It's a sign that it's used, that they only use kosher products. So, but it doesn't make it kosher. The OU doesn't make it kosher. It's just a sign used for us to know. How do we know what to buy? It has a sign. But it could be that the split hooves in the chewing its cud, that's what makes it kosher. Here, what makes it an arava? Does it have to have those items? So we could use that same question here when it comes to the arava. Is it the red stem that makes it into an arava, a kosher arava? Or is that just a sign that it's from the right type of tree? It's from the right. But if you have from the same type of tree, you have some stems that that aren't red. Is that going to be a problem that it's not kosher? Is it the red that makes it kosher? Is it the narrow, the long and narrow? Does that make it kosher? No, it's a sign that's the kosher thing. It could be. You could even have an arava that has serrated edges, and it's still going to be kosher. So you see that the smooth is not what makes it kosher. It's just a sign that this is the right type of tree. And therefore, chilfa gila is also kosher. It sounds like that might be the understanding. Yes, Jeffrey.
It's even more complicated because they already dismissed the need to be on the water, right? And because it's called avenacha. So
Right.
they first dealt with that issue, okay? But I think what the Gemara realizes that Jews live in very many different places, even before Rashi's time, and that the flora and fauna are not going to be the same. They're going to be varieties. They're going to be similar, but they're not going to be the same. And that they want to really discuss it so that this is universally available. So if you move to some place they don't know about, of course we did, you're going to find similar things and not similar things. You're going to have to make a decision.
Right. The only thing is, it would be nice if the Gemara made it more clear, what to do, because it leaves it a little vague. What do you do if you have something that's not, that doesn't have all the signs, that only has some, that left it vague in the Gemara.
That's why with birds we have a Kabbalah. With birds we have a Kabbalah. Not only are the signs good enough, but you have to have somebody told you that, yes, my teacher told me, and it's very complicated. We came to the new world and a lot of decisions had to be made.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In any event, so according to Tues, it seems that what Tues is, the way Tues is understanding it, that really you need to have all three signs, but there happens to be one exception, Chilfa Gila. Now, okay, so that's basically the Gemara that we learned yesterday, and the Gemara finished off that piece by saying that Chilfa Gila is kosher. And the Gemara said, isn't that obvious? We just said that it's kosher. The Gemara answers, yeah, but you might have thought that because it's called, chilfa means arava. Chilfa is like Aramaic for arava. And although we'll see the Gemara, the next Gemara, we'll see that it seems like they used chilfa and aravta. One meant a tzaftzfa and one meant an arava. So, but at least at this point, chilfa means a type of arava, and it's a chilfa gila is this kind that has serrated edges. And okay, so we'll soon see in the Gemara another thing about chilfa and arava. But here at this point, the Gemara says that because it's called chilfa gila, what it's basically saying is, you might think, basically the Gemara is saying that there's room to think that that's not called the typical, arava. It's almost like saying, let me think of a good example here. You could have like a generic type of thing, but then if it says a specific type, like smoked paprika, paprika has a very nice taste to food, but smoked paprika, once you add on that new term, it has a new name. Oh boy. I mean, it's like, you have to, it's a whole different type. That means that, yeah, it's paprika, right? It's paprika, but it's called smoked paprika. It actually changes the whole entity. The fact that it has a different name, it means it is paprika, but it happens to have some add-on to it that ruins that might not fit into the category that we're looking for. So if someone asks you to buy paprika and you go and buy smoked paprika in the store, they're not going to necessarily be able to use it.
It's like smoked salmon.
Yeah, salmon or smoked salmon, right? Okay, but
smoked salmon is lox.
Yeah, right. But once you add the word smoke to it, so it is still salmon, but it's a whole different type. So here also there's room to say that once you called it chilfa gila type of an arava, that sounds like maybe that's there's room to say that maybe is the wrong one. We want the plain. We want the plain, not this type, this add-on, this gila type of arava, gila chilfa gila. So therefore, the Gemara says, but no, it's still going to be a kosher, even though it has another name to it, and which implies like it's not the essence of what we were looking for. No, that's also fine. The Gemara says, maybe it is a problem. And the Gemara answers, Arvei Nachal. The Gemara answers that it's Arvei Nachal, that it says plural, and therefore it must be including something. The Gemara says, you know what it's including, even though it has like another name to it, but it's still from the same family, it's still going to be kosher. It's a chilfa gila, serrated edges, but it's going to be kosher. That's what the pasuk Arvei Nachal is adding on. Okay, so that's basically the Gemaras of yesterday. We did also mention a Tues over here. We had an interesting insight into Tues.
By the way, in Yiddish, we had a special word in Yiddish for the serrations. I don't know if you had the same word. It's called zegalach. It's called zegalach, and we learned. But they didn't show us though. But we learned when we were children that there was a kind of a rava that was kosher that had zegalach, but they didn't show it to us. So
Chil Fagila. That's it. Chil
that's it.
Fagila. Yeah. Now that would be interesting if Rabbi Steinsaltz knows what Chil Fagila is. That would be nice, but I don't know if we know what it is. Now, yeah. So I was just mentioning that Tosis yesterday we learned an interesting thing about halacha l'maisha misinais, that you could have a halacha l'maisha. I mentioned to you a vart from Reb Chaim Brisker, from Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, about halacha l'maisha misinai, that you sometimes have a halacha l'maisha misinai that it explains a halacha, and sometimes you have halacha l'maisha misinai that it adds on a whole new halacha. It's a mechadesh or mefarish. It's either adding on a whole new law, halacha l'maisha misinai, or it's like explaining a law that we know and gives a little some type of a qualification for it, or it gives some type of dimension for it to be for rules about it. So it explains the halacha mishmas. The case that Reb Chaim Brisker is talking about is, he talks about a case where you have arla schutz la'aretz, that even outside of Israel you have to keep the rules of arla, of not benefiting from a tree that's 3 years. So he mentions over there, because he brings the Rambam. The Rambam mentions that the Goinim held even the 4th year you have to be machmir. And he said, I don't know any source to be machmir on the 4th year. They're talking about the kerem on a vineyard. You have to be machmir the 4th year, not to eat from the fruit. And because in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, we would eat by the time we were tahar, we would eat that fruit in Yerushalayim. And you have to be machmir even outside of Eretz Yisrael. So the Rambam says no, but he brings the Goinim who said yes. So the Reb Chaim wants to explain the argument. What's the argument? The Rambam and the Goinim. So he says the argument was, if the law of chutz la'aretz, of arla, the first 3 years of fruits outside of Israel, is that a whole new law that that we have a tradition that you have to keep arla outside of Eretz Yisrael? Is that a whole new law, or is that extending the law that we know in Eretz Yisrael? We extend it to outside of Eretz Yisrael. So if you're just extending it from the Eretz Yisrael to outside, so maybe the law of the 4th year, which is all part of that same category, maybe that also will apply, because you're extending the laws of Eretz Yisrael arla. But if it's a whole new thing outside of Israel, you have a law called Arlas Chutzlar. It's halacha l'maisha misinai. It's a law given to Moshe, a tradition that we have to have, that we're not allowed to benefit. That's a whole new thing. That has nothing to do with the Torah law in Eretz Yisrael of keeping Arla, and also the Neta Ravoy, the 4th year, the Kerem Ravoy, the 4th year. And therefore, there's room to say that that would be the Rambam's understanding. There's no reason to keep there's no reason to say a 4th, that you have to be careful about the 4th year. It's a whole new thing. The 4th year doesn't say anything about it. Arla, it says that it's a whole new law that we have a tradition about from Moshe at Har Sinai. And therefore, you don't have to keep the 4th year. And based on that, you could say that's the meaning over here with Abba Shol, the top line where we said that Abba Shol doesn't. He says he doesn't have a halacha l'maisha misinai. So how does he know that one of the aravos, when it says plural, he says one is for the lulav, one is for the Beis Hamikdash? How do you know it's for the Beis Hamikdash? It's for something else. It doesn't say what. It just says arve. It just says plural. So Tais is bothered. He's wondered. Tema, he says, it's a big wonder. How does he know that you need a ravis for the Beis Hamikdash? No, you don't hold the halacha l'maisha misinai. If you hold the halacha l'maisha misinai, so you know the halacha l'maisha misinai explained that you have to use a ravis also for the Beis Hamikdash. There was a way they would surround. We'll soon see in about 10 pages that they would surround the mizbeach, the ravis, and so on, and do a little ceremony. But according to Abba Shol, it just says 2. So you need one for the lulav, one for something else. But how do you know it's the Beis Hamikdash? Maybe even outside the Beis Hamikdash, you should also do some type of ritual with the arava. He says. Places asked. So according to this Reb Chaim, you could answer that. Again, it's not my own vart. I heard it from a Rav, Arya Leibowitz, that he says maybe that's the answer to Taisa's question. That he says, according to this Reb Chaim, he could say Abba Shol also holds of the halacha l'maisha misinai. He just doesn't hold that the halacha l'maisha misinai tells you a new thing. He says we know from the pasuk about a second arava. All the halacha l'Moshe Sinai does is gives more clarity on that. It's a mafarish. It explains what the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is, but the source of it is this halacha that you have a second arava. But it just all it does is it explains to us that arava has to be in the Beis Hamikdash. And so that's what the halacha l'Moshe Sinai tells us. So not that he argues on the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. He also answers that question. How does he argue on the halacha l'Moshe Sinai? The answer is he doesn't. He also holds it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They both, but is the halacha l'Moshe Sinai adding something new, or is it just explaining the rule of this, the protocol of that halacha that we see hinted in the Torah where it says arve? Okay, anyway, so that was a interesting discussion that we mentioned yesterday, and we also mentioned how Tues seems to hold that every time we're darshaning for many of these psukim, he holds that it means it has to be that way, and he argues on the other opinion. In other words, he holds it has to be this way, and the other opinion he doesn't hold of. So if you hold aravos is including the arve, the plural, is somehow including, let's say, the Beis Hamikdash aravos, then he doesn't hold that you need two aravos, or he doesn't hold that arve would include the Baal and the Harim aravos, because he's using it for a different pasuk. So we saw that Tosfos seems to be very machmir, and it sounds like Tosfos would hold you actually need to have, you should have, if you hold that you need two aravos, you should make sure that you're only getting aravos that are on a nachal, because according to that opinion, he doesn't hold of the other opinion that you could have aravos that are from a field called the Baal field, or a harim, or bein a harim, between the mountains, or a field that's watered by rainwater is sufficient. That wouldn't be good. You need to have aravos grow on the nachal according to that opinion, because you're using arve to show that you need plural. We'll soon see in the next Mishnah about that, the different opinions about the how many aravos you need and so on. Okay, so anyway, the Gemara continues. We're going to continue on the next little piece of Gemara. Oh, did I just lose something? Okay, so the next piece of Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda. We are on 34a, about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Chisda, Hani tlas mila yishtani shmayu. Rav Chisda says, we're talking about aravos, chilfagila, tzafzafa. He says, there's three things that the names changed michichara Beis Hamikdash. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's three things that the names of them have changed. What are they? Chalafta, aravta. The chalafta, which we're going to translate as tzafzafa, which is the non-kosher arava, has been switched for aravta, for the kosher arava. Aravta, chalafta. And the aravta, which is the kosher arava, was switched for the chalafta, for the tzafzafa, the non-kosher arava, which basically means that they now call the kosher arava a chalafta, even though chalafta really used to mean tzafzafa, which was non-kosher. Now it's used for the kosher one. So the Gemara says, "My nafkamina, what's the difference if they used to call it this, or they call it that?" So the Gemara says, very simple, the lulav. Because for the lulav, that's a mitzvah, you need to make sure to use the right one. And when it comes to putting flowers in your house and using willows or the arava or the tzapzifa, maybe it doesn't make a difference, Why are you telling me this, Rav Chisda? But when it comes, there is a halakha that it applies for. You know what it applies? It applies to fulfilling the mitzvah of lulav. If you use the tzafzifa, you didn't do the mitzvah, as we saw in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says tzafzifa is not kosher. It has to be an arava. And now, if you say arava, people think you're talking about a tzafzifa. So you got to make sure that's clear that what you're referring to, because the names changed, and you need to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav. Shipura, and the next case is Shipura Chatzoitz Rasa. That they name that the term Shipura they now have switched with chatzotz rasa, which Shipura was a shofar, and chatzotz rasa is the non-kosher type of a shofar. It's a straight type of a horn, and it's not kosher, and therefore and so the Gemara says, so what's the difference? So they use this name, the chatzotz, which literally means a trumpet. So they call the shofar a trumpet, and a chatzotz a trumpet they call a shofar. L'may nafka. You know what's the difference? Shofar Rosh Hashanah. The difference is for the shofar of Rosh Hashanah that you got to make sure to use the one that used to be called shofar, and now it's called chatzotz rasa. It's supposed to be bent and so on, and it's really a machlokes if is it only lechatchila? In other words, if it's not bent, if it's straight, is that really a there is such an opinion. The Rambam holds that it has to be bent. If it's not kosher. According to the other opinions, it's only lechatchila. But anyway, either way, that's the way it should be. It should be a bent shofar. That's the now it's supposed to be from an aisle, and from a ram, and according to the opinion in the Mishnah over there in Rosh Hashanah, it does say Yael Pashut. There is an opinion there. The Tanakama there says Shofar Shel Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, that it's Shel Yael Pashut, some type of straight shofar from a Yael. Yael, I don't know to translate exactly as some type of deer, I think. Anyway, the bottom line is that you want to know what you're calling the shofar Rosh Hashanah. When you're going to buy it, or you're going to whatever to use, make sure you use the one that's the appropriate one, because people call the names have been switched. Now, the other case is the third case. Third case is pesorta. That small table is called a pesorta, and it's changed with the name. It used to be called small table. Used to be called pesorta. Now it's called pesura, which pesura, the big table, is now called the pesorta. So they switched the big table and the small table. You know what's the difference? The answer is the Gemara says, the difference is that if a person buys a pesorta, you got to know what people call it. So just because it used to be called that, now it goes by what's you have to know what the term now is, because that's what will you'll be obligated to accept whatever is the term that's used now. Now, Amra Abaye, so Abaye says, I also have a case that seems like the name's changed. There's a Beikossi, and has been switched with Hovlila, and Hovlila has been switched with Beikossi. What are these two things? They're two stomachs in the animal stomach, and there's different halachas that it applies. We'll soon see that lamai nafkamina. What's the difference in halacha? The Gemara says that the machad hanimtza ba'oivei beis hakoisos. The difference is if you find a needle. This is, of course, regarding hilchas treifos, where there's a number of 18 types of things that could ruin, that could make your animal treif. Now, what does the word treif really mean? Treif really means that it was clawed. We use the word treif, anything non-kosher. It's not exactly correct term that should be used for non-kosher. The usser, but the word treif, really what it really comes from is an animal that was clawed. It wasn't slaughtered properly, and or if it was clawed and it can't be slaughtered properly because it's going to die. It was that's really treifa, where it has a wound in it, And we use the term treifas, and the halachas of treifas apply all types of wounds that the animal has that would make that the animal is not healthy. And according to halacha, even if the USDA claims that it's fine for you to eat, but in halacha we have many different rules for what makes an animal that this animal we don't eat because it's considered a treifa. And not only we don't eat it, there's also problems of having milk from an animal that's a treifa. There've been stories. In fact, there was the RBST or something type of injection that they were giving these animals. So there was a whole big problem that came up because if they're making a hole into the animal by injecting this type of injection, which was, I don't know what the chemical term is for it, but it was I see on the milk bottles it says no RBST. They don't put that type of thing into the animal because if you do, then there's a problem because it could be that it is that the animal is considered a treifa because it now has a hole inside its inner organs. And this is what our Gemara is also talking about. So you can't drink the milk of such an animal. And so there's a whole problem a number of years ago when they realized that this type of a injection is making the animals treifa, and then the milk is not called, not only it's not chol of Yisrael, it's called milk of a treifa, which is usher, which is prohibited. It's not just some chol of Yisrael issue. This is a real major. I mean, chol of Yisrael is also a big issue, but milk of a treifa animal. So here we're dealing with a certain type of an issue where the animal has a needle inside the stomach. How does that happen? The animal swallowed the needle probably, or I don't know, lied down on the needle. Somehow the needle got into the stomach, and it's a question of it creating a hole. And now the animal has 4 stomachs. A kosher animal has 4 stomachs. And one of the stomachs that we're talking about, the second stomach that it has, is supposed to have 2 layers of skin around it. And so there's more room to be lenient because even if one of the layers is punctured, but if it doesn't go to the other layer, then it's fine because we're not afraid that the food that's in the stomach is going to seep out into the body of the animal and cause the animal to be a treifa. But the third stomach is actually a thinner layer to it. And because of that, the third layer, if it has a puncture, some type of we need to be much more careful because it only has a very thin layer. It doesn't have 2 layers. And so the Gemara says that now they call one of the stomachs this name, and they call the other stomach the other. They switch the names of the second and third stomachs. So the halacha now, you have to be careful when you say it to the Rav, where the needle is. You have to know which stomach it really is in, because that would be a difference in halacha of the laws of treifa. And if the animal is a treifa, you can't shacht it, even if it heals. It stays non-kosher. And when it has these holes inside, that makes it's non-kosher. And so that would be so they check for different things after they slaughter an animal. They check the lungs and so on, and the things that they look for to see if an animal is treifa. So they're supposed to look for. Now the Gemara says l'may nafkamina l'machad into baby besa kaisis. The difference would be if you find this machat, this needle, in the thickness of the besa kaisis, which used to be called besa kaisis. If it was in the besa kaisis, which is the second stomach. Again, I don't know if any of you people are familiar with the names of the different stomachs, but if you are, we could get you the English. Robert, you want to tell us what the Art Scroll says for the names of the base hakoisei stomach? I might even have a picture in the Art Scroll of the stomachs of an animal, the second and third stomach. Does it say the names of them?
No, I don't see any of that.
One is called Okay, 34. We're on the bottom of 34A. So it's 34A6 or 5, 34A5.
All right, let me see. Hold on.
But might have a picture of the stomachs of an
No.
animal. Uh-huh.
No, there's nothing.
Oh, okay. Or at least the translation of the words. Do you see in that? It might have the hovlila and the beit kasi. Anyway, one is the second stomach of the animal, and one is the third stomach of the animal. And in any event, there's a difference in halacha if a needle is found in them, and because of the thickness of the wall around it. Now, the next Gemara says, Amar Rava Bar Yosef. Rava Bar Yosef says, Afani Yomer Bavel Borsif Bavel. So the next Gemara tells us the same thing, another thing. So we've got three names that are switched. Then Abaye said a fourth thing that switched about the stomachs of the animal. And then Rava Bar Yosef says a fifth thing. Now, what switched? The name Bavel to Borsif. Bavel is Babylon, and Borsif seems to be some type of a city or that they now call Bavel, and they switched Bavel to Borsif. So it says Bavel, Borsif, Bavel. They switched these two names. Why the countries do this, I have no idea. But they switched the names of these countries. The country Bavel, I think Borsif is not a country. It's probably a neighborhood or something. But they switched the name of the country with the Borsif and Borsif with Bavel. Now, my nafkamina. So the Gemara says, what's the difference in halacha if you call it Borsif or Bavel? And the Gemara answers lagite nashim. The difference is regarding a get. That what happens? What is the law of a get? So the law by a get, a person gives a divorce. So the law is that outside of Israel is different than inside Israel. But Bavel is similar to Eretz Yisrael. There's a lot of similarities that Babylon had to Eretz Yisrael, and the fact that the people were in Eretz Yisrael, they were much more proficient in the laws of Gittin, and additionally, there were always Yidden that were traveling to Bavel, and therefore Bavel was a place that was in the rules of get. It was similar to Eretz Yisrael. It had these two positive factors, characteristics that caused Bavel to be considered like Eretz Yisrael regarding a get. What is it? What am I referring to? So in Tractate Gittin, it talks about when you bring a get from a faraway place to Chutz La'aretz, you have to say b'fanai nechtav, b'fanai nechtam. The people, the witnesses that bring it have to say that we were there when it was written, and we saw it in front of us. It was signed, meaning that they have to make sure. They have to be sure. We have to be sure that it was done in front of them, and if not, this would possibly ruin the validity of the get. And in Eretz Yisrael, they knew about these laws so well that we weren't afraid that it wasn't done in front of them and it wasn't done for the right person and so on. We weren't afraid of these type of issues, and therefore you didn't have to say that because everyone was bucky. They were bucky that it has to be done in a way that's lishma, that it has to be done for the purpose of those people. That's who is getting the divorce. You can't just have a generic divorce document and then hand it over. It has to have been written for the right person. And additionally, in Eretz Yisrael, you had this positive characteristic that there were witnesses always available, and the same thing was Bavel. People were in Eretz Yisrael. Everyone would go up to be Oila Regel for the holidays, and they would recognize the signatures of the and know that it's not fraud. They would recognize the signatures of the witnesses. However, in Bavel was the same rule. However, outside of Eretz Yisrael, you didn't have that, and therefore there could be problems. Now, the thing is that Bavel is one thing. Now, Borsi, it doesn't have the same rules as Bavel. It's similar. Borsi is similar to Chutzla. It's part of Chutz La'aretz, and it's similar to Chutz La'aretz. People were not Buckies there. They weren't so knowledgeable there. And it's near Bavel, it says, but they weren't B'nai Torah, and they didn't know these laws. And if you bring a get from Borsif, from what used to be called Borsif, that was a problem. You needed to say b'fanai nechtav. You had to make sure that you had to clarify that it was written in front of you and it was signed in front of you, and so on. And so therefore, now that they switch names, where's Borsif and where's Bavel? So therefore, you have to follow the rules according to which community it is. So what used to be called Bavel doesn't need to say b'fanei nechtam, and what used to be called Borsif did need to say the b'fanei nechtam. Now that they switched the name, so they have to switch accordingly. You have to switch the rules would switch. So that's the laws of Gitei Nashim. Again, it's not so applicable. The reason we brought this Gemara here was all because of the difference, the change in the name of Arava and Tzaftzfa, which they use the Aramaic law of the Chalafta. But that is that's basically the term that switched, and that's why we brought this little piece of Rav Chizda, because that's important to know, because you need to make sure you have Aravais, not Tzaftzfas, not Chalaftas. And now that they switched the name, you got to make sure you have Chalaftas and not Aravais. Yes, Jeffrey.
We even have a rabbi named Chalafta
Uh-huh.
in the Gemara, right?
Oh,
It's spelled the same way, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
So I'm sure he was an expert. And it's also funny because the root Chalaf means to
Which?
Interchange, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's sort of playing a little pun, picking out those for us.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. So coming back to the laws of the Daled Minim, the Mishnah on page 34b. We're on 34b now. The top line. Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Rabbi Yishmael says, Shleisha Adasim Ushtei Aravos. You need 3 Adasim and 2 Aravos. That's what we do. Lulav echad, v'esrog echad, and 1 lulav, 1 esrog. V'afilu, and now Rabbi Yishmael adds on an interesting line. He says, even shnayim ketumim, even if 2 of the hadasim are cut on the tops, it's still going to be okay. We'll soon see in the Gemara exactly that. We'll see that Rabbi Yishmael retracts, but whatever. At this point, the Mishnah says that he holds that even 2 of them of the hadasim are cut on the top. It's kosher. The echad ain't a cut, one's not cut. That's kosher. That's according to Rabbi Yishmael. Reb Tarfon Omer. Reb Tarfon says, afilu shloshtan ketumim, even if all 3 of them are cut, they're kosher. And the understanding of Reb Tarfon, interestingly enough, is that hadas doesn't need to be hadar. The hadas doesn't need to be beautiful. And what does the pasuk say? Pre-eitz hadar, kapes tamarim, anaf eitz aves arve nachal. Now, so there's room to say that pre-eitz hadar, it says the word hadar by the esrog, and right after it is hadar kapes tamarim without a vav. So there's room to say that hadar goes on the lulav also, but maybe it doesn't go on the others. So hadassim and aravos maybe don't need to be hadar, beautiful, and therefore even if their tops are chopped off, that would not be a problem. Anyway, the discussion we'll get into it, but that's just a little understanding here. And so Rav Tarfon says even if all three are cut off, Rabbi Akiva, now comes Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says Keshem shalulav echad, even though a lulav, there's just like a lulav, you need one. The esrog echad and one esrog, kach hadas echad ba'arava achas. The same thing is one hadas and one arava. Okay, so we've got some lenient views over here. We've got the view of Rebbe Yishmael, which you need the three hadassim, and Reb Tarfon seems to agree that you need three. It seems like, but they don't have to be hadar. They could even be chopped. The tops chopped off. Rebbe Yishmael held two could be chopped. The tops are cut off, but of the hadassim. Again, we're talking about the hadassim, but Reb Tarfon says even if all three, it's kosher. And we said Rashi because it doesn't need to be hadar. And then we had Rabbi Akiva that said that all you need is one of each. Now comes the Gemara. Tanya, it was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Yishmael says, pre-eitz hadar. It says the fruit of a tree, that's beautiful. And it doesn't say peiros, eitz hadar, it says pre. So it means esrog. It means, echad means one. Kapois tamarim. Now, kapois is missing a vav, so it doesn't say plural. So therefore, you learn kapois is echad. Kapois is like kapas tamarim. A branch of a frond of a date palm is one. Anaf eitz avos. Anaf eitz avos, it uses three words. So because it uses three words, so the Gemara says, the Brisa says, oh, Anaf eitz avos shloisha. You see, you need three. Arvei, plural, nachal. Doesn't say aravas nachal, or uses arvei nachal. So because it says arvei nachal shtayim, you need two. Va'afilu shnayim ketumim ve'echod she'enoi kotum. And Rabbi Yishmael finishes off his paragraph, his ruling, by saying that even if the hadassim, it's interesting, he jumps back to the hadassim. Surprisingly, he said hadassim already, and then he jumps back to. Then he says aravos. Then he jumps back to hadassim, and he obviously is talking about the hadassim because he says that the afilu shnayim ketumim ve'echad she'ena katum. Even if two are cut off, one is not. The top is not cut off. That's kosher. So we know he's talking about something that needs three, and the only thing that needs three is hadassim. So we see he's jumping back to the law of hadassim that even if two are cut, the tops are cut. Well, one's not good. That's good. Reb Tarfon Aimer Shloisha. Reb Tarfon says three. Vafilu shloshtan ketumim. Even if they're all, the tops are cut off. Rabbi Akiva Aimer. Rabbi Akiva says Keshem shalul levacha masur gachod kach hadas echad ba'arav achas. Just like a lulav, one esrog is one. So the same thing. Hadas and arava are all one. You don't need to have three. You don't need to have two. You're fine. One. One is good. Amalai Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Yachol yehei esrog imahen ba'aguda achas. I would think that the esrog should be together, tied together with the lulav, hadassim, and aravos. Amrit. V'cheinamar pre-eitz hadar v'kapois tamarim. So Amrit, you said that you can't explain it that way because v'cheinamar, do we say pre-eitz hadar v'kapois tamarim? Or you could say that you can't exclude that's a good thought, but that's not it's not hinted to that way in the pasuk. It's hinted the opposite. Why? Because it says kapos tamarim, not vik kapos tamarim, and therefore it makes it sound like the pre-Eitz Hadar is on its own, and on the next group it has kapos tamarim and the hadassim and aravos all connected with vavs. But the first kapos, the word the kapos tamarim doesn't have a vav, which would connect it to the esrog. So what we see is the esrog is an entity of its own. The kapos tamarim, together with the hadassim and aravos, they are an entity together that goes together with those three. But the esrog is not part of it because it doesn't have the vav that would include it together with those, because it doesn't say the kapos tamarim with the vav. It only says, does it say vikapos? It only says kapos. And therefore, it says va'anaf eitzavos. It says by the hadassim that it has a vav, and it says by the arvei nachal it says a vav. So those have a vav. That means that those are meant to go together. The esrog is meant to be separate. Uminayin shema'akvin zeh zeh. How do you know that if you're missing one, you don't fulfill the mitzvah with the others? The Talmud Leimer, it says ulakachtem shetehi lakicha tama. You have to have a complete lakicha. It has to be a complete taking. And with missing one of those species is not going to be considered a complete taking. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yishmael, and the Gemara asked a question on Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael in the Mishnah had said, there's a strange thing. He said that two of them could be cut off, one can't. Where do you come up with such a differentiation?
Hi, what's up?
What was that? Where do you come up with such a thing? Either.
What about tomorrow? What is tomorrow? Tomorrow is Wednesday.
What about it says what? Where are you coming from, Rabbi Yishmael? Monafshach. What are you thinking? Ish layman boy, if you need complete ones, liboy namikolo, let all three be complete. If you don't need complete ones, even one shouldn't need to be complete. If you don't need complete, and where are you coming from with that? You either manavshach is used as I don't know how to literally translate it. What's in your soul, manavshach? But the meaning of it is, how are you thinking? Either you think this way, then that should. If you think that way, either way, you're wrong. That's what manavshach is used for. Either way, it doesn't fit. If you want to say you need shleimim, you need complete ones, then all should be complete. If you say you don't need complete ones, then none of them need to be complete. Where do you come up with this intermediary ruling? This ruling that is a mixture of both. It doesn't fit any rule. So the Gemara says, Amar Bira, who was the name of a scholar, he says, Amar Rabami, it's not a famous name, but it says in the name of Rabami that Chazar by Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael retracted. As I told you in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael changed his mind, and he makes it kosher even one hadas is kosher. You don't need three. All you need is one, and that is he holds you need hadar, but it doesn't have to be. You don't need three. He changed his mind that it's enough to have one, and the one that you have does need to be complete, and the other two you don't need. If you don't want to use them, you don't need them. They're not. You don't need three. You just need one. Okay. So that time is up. Okay. I'll just say the next line. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha Reb Tarfon. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. The halacha follows Reb Tarfon that a hadassim that's cut from that it's cut off. What did Reb Tarfon say? Even shloshtan ketumim is kosher. So the halacha follows Reb Tarfon that even if they're cut off, they're going to be kosher. Okay, we're going to stop here. Zaygus on to everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.